From Kansas State University, this is Agriculture Today. Eric Atkinson here, and coming up today, K-State's Gregg Hanzlicek talking about a health condition in young beef calves that can quickly result in calf losses. It's called Enterotoxemia. Gregg will look at how it occurs and possible solutions for it. Also today, from the latest Cattle Chat podcast out of the Beef Cattle Institute at K-State, two topics: managing cow herd hay feeding more acutely as this winter presses on, and genetic considerations in selecting bulls for breeding replacement heifers. Featured K-State's Brad White, Bob Larson, and Bob Weaber there. Later, K-State's Charlie Lee on new research into the costs and returns of coyote control methods to prevent predation on cattle. All that here on Agriculture Today.
What is radon? Home exposure to radon gas is the leading cause of lung cancer death in the United States for non-smokers. In Kansas, 1 in 4 homes will test at or above the EPA action level. The Surgeon General recommends all homes be tested and fixed if necessary. Visit kansasradonprogram.org for more information. Test, fix, save a life. This message brought to you by the Kansas Radon Program, the Kansas Association of Broadcasters, and this station.
Thanks for tuning in for our Tuesday edition of Agriculture Today. Back by our way once more from the Veterinary Diagnostic Laboratory here at Kansas State University, the director of the Production Animal Field Investigations Unit with that laboratory, Gregg Hanzlicek. Gregg is along our way regularly to talk about current topics in bovine health management. This one, Gregg, is about beef calf health, and the formal name of the condition we'll talk about today, Enterotoxemia. It's known by other names that will help identify it in just a second. This is a very serious condition, though.
It is. We see it every year, and I'm here today to talk about it, not necessarily thinking that we're seeing more of it, but we sure are fielding more questions this year than we have in the past, so I just thought we ought to readdress this pretty darn common disease in young calves.
Well, just what is it? Let's get right to the details.
Well, the enterotoxemia, entero means intestine, tox means toxin, and emia means in the blood. So basically what this is a disease that's caused by a bacteria in the intestine. The bacteria releases a toxin that then gets into the bloodstream, and then we have major organ shutdown and a lot of times sudden death.
Now, we're talking about bacteria that is commonly found in the gut of cattle, right?
Absolutely. So the organism is called Clostridium perfringens type C. There's other Clostridium organisms that can cause this, but that's the primary one. And the Clostridium is a huge family of bacteria that cause problems in cattle. And producers have heard of blackleg. That's caused by a Clostridium, not this one. Botulism, that's caused by a member, and then tetanus. Those are all Clostridium organisms, along with this enterotoxemia or purple gut, overeating disease issues that we see.
So what triggers the problem here, the release of the toxins? What's the mechanism that causes illness and even death in calves?
Well, what we think goes on is that the calf takes a very large meal. Most beef calves are going to nurse 5 to 6 times a day, and anything that prevents them from their normal frequency of nursing, then the next time they nurse, they're going to take a very large meal. And what we think goes on is that this large meal of carbohydrates and protein in the milk, when it goes to the intestine, then those Clostridium organisms, they just start reproducing like crazy. And we always talk about they probably double in numbers every 20 minutes. And as they're reproducing very, very quickly, that's when they start releasing those toxins that the calf absorbs into their bloodstream.
And then the calf is weakened by those toxins, and eventually you could lose the calf? Is that right?
Absolutely. And sometimes the clinical signs of getting and see a calf early in the course of the disease, the calf will be colicky. They'll be kicking at their belly. Sometimes they're a little bloated. They're not eating, of course, and the ears are dropped. Although this organism can be associated with diarrhea, we don't normally see diarrhea in purple gut or overeating because, unfortunately, the classical sign and the most common sign is sudden death.
And you're talking about within a day or two.
Well, yeah, and if you can actually see those calves, if you see them start this disease within just a few minutes, they'll go through to the terminal stages if you can't get treatment into them. So it's a producer that goes out and says, "I've checked my calves last night. I go out this morning and I've got 1 or 2 dead calves, and then they're necropsied, and that's what it is."
And the necropsies can be very definitive in terms of identifying this condition. Then.
They can, and that's where the term purple gut comes from, is that when the veterinarian or whoever opens up the calf's abdomen after death, the large percentage of the intestines will be a dark red, almost a purple, and that's where that term comes from.
And there's organ shutdown. That really is what the eventual damage looks like.
Absolutely, yeah. The intestines will be full of gas and blowing up, but what killed the calf were the toxins that got in the bloodstream, so they're going to shut down all the major organs, and that's where we get the sudden death.
Greg, if producer identifies this condition soon enough, and they'd have to be really on the ball to do so, it sounds, is there any treatment alternative whatsoever to arrest this condition?
There is. These organisms are very susceptible to penicillin, so just regular penicillin. Then there's some products out there that are called C&D antitoxins, and if we can get those, the penicillin, the antitoxin, in the calf quickly, we can save some of those. But again, probably 99% of the time, it's a sudden death, and it's a calf that's just found dead.
So, alternately, can anything be done if treatment is sketchy as a possibility here? Are there preventative measures that can be taken?
Well, there's some things we can do prevention-wise, and people ask, what about the meal feeding? And there's really not much we can do about the calves eating a large meal. I mean, a lot of times it's after a storm where the calves and the cows are bunched against the shelter belt. Nobody's nursing. Storm goes over. The calves are hungry. They take a big meal. We've seen it after cows have been synchronized, so they're kept away from the calves, and then calves take a large meal. So those kind of things, I don't know that there's anything we can do. But there are very effective vaccines for Clostridium organisms, and the 7-way vaccines are very good vaccines, and those are vaccines that are targeting all those Clostridium organisms that we talked about earlier. So
you would want to administer your vaccine to the dam, the cow, or the heifer, as opposed to the calf?
Absolutely. The best option would be to run the cows and the heifers through the chute 5 to 8 weeks, somewhere in there, prior to the calving season, and vaccinate the cow with the 7-way. Now, producers, and I know they know this, but we're not passing those antibodies from the vaccine to the calf because the cow can't do that. What she's going to do is she's going to take those antibodies and put them in the colostrum. So when that calf nurses that first feeding, it's going to be immediately protected against this purple gut organism. That's the best option. And being in the rural world at one time in my life, I know that producers don't really like to run heavy pregnant cows through the chute. I can tell you it can be done very, very easily, and it's not dangerous, but I can understand why producers may not want to do it. So the other alternative would be to use the 7-way vaccines on young calves. And just as a caveat there is that these calves are born with an intact immune system, but it's very, very immature. It's naive, and so we know that their ability to respond to an injectable vaccine early in life is not very good. It's not nearly as good as it's going to be when they get out there a few months of age. So there are people that are using this vaccine at birth, and I'm not going to say don't do it, but it'd probably be better if you could delay that as late as you can. And remember that most of these cases occur in the first 60 days of life.
But again, the preference would be to treat those cows, treat those heifers, no matter how much more trouble that might be. That is your alternative of choice, honestly.
It is a tried and proven way to prevent this purple gut in baby calves. I've seen it many, many times out in the field.
And just as a quick follow-up here, this is restricted to a condition in young calves. You say the older calves, while still perhaps nursing, they'll be much less susceptible to this naturally.
Absolutely. The first 2 months, first 60 days of life is when they're the most susceptible. And what's going on is that those baby calves are missing an enzyme that's normally in the intestine of older calves that actually counteracts the toxins that are produced by the Clostridium organism. So again, a calf that's 6 months of age is going to have those Clostridium organisms. It might have rapid growth, but it's going to be able to detoxify better than a baby calf.
Right. But again, if a producer upon calving season this spring, and we do have some calves on the ground already, encounters sudden calf losses and they're not sure as to what is the instigating factor there, they need to talk with their veterinarian and see if this in fact is this enterotoxemia at work.
And that's actually a great point, is that, yes, we can open up and do a necropsy and it looks like purple gut, and we can look for the organism, but again, the organism is in healthy calves. So what the modern diagnostic would be, we can actually look for the toxins. And so we would highly recommend have the veterinarian do the necropsy, take some of those intestinal tissues, send them in to us, and let us look for what toxin it is to make sure that it is enterotoxemia.
The losses can mount. You don't want that to occur, of course, cow-calf producers. Again, the formal name is enterotoxemia. It's also known as purple gut or overconsumption disease in young calves. So you might know it by those names. Regardless, it is a condition well worth guarding against, cow-calf producers. And Gregg, we appreciate the time as always. Thanks for bringing this to our attention today. Gregg Hanzlicek, over from the Veterinary Diagnostic Laboratory here at Kansas State University. And Gregg's with us periodically to talk about things that are going on in the field of bovine health management, and this one of particular interest to you cow-calf operators as we get into the spring calving season in earnest now. And just a quick note ahead of the break, you might want to go ahead and visit the Veterinary Diagnostic Laboratory's website. That's ksvdl.org. Among other things they have there, a running account of animal disease trends we find in Kansas. They take this count by way of their positive diagnostic tests as samples come into the lab. You can see county by county where primary diseases are present, for example, anaplasmosis, Johne's disease, rabies, and a whole assortment of other small animal and equine diseases. This is an interesting graphic that they update regularly, so it's information you can check out at ksvdl.org. And we will return after these moments away. You're listening to Agriculture Today. For 25 years, K-State Research and Extension's Kansas Agricultural Mediation Services has been providing a no-cost, confidential place to call in and visit with an agricultural lawyer. Our experts are available to help you producers handle legal and financial issues. Explore your options and generate solutions. Call us at 800-321-3276 or visit us online. Kansas Agricultural Mediation Services. Agriculture Today is back now and continuing today's run of information for you cow-calf producers. We now offer these highlights from the latest BCI Cattle Chat podcast, courtesy of the Beef Cattle Institute here at K-State. And today's featured topics, taking stock of the winter forage supply and bull selection for breeding replacement heifers. As we turn it over to cow-calf specialist Bob Weaber, veterinarian Bob Larson, and your moderator, veterinarian Brad White.
We talked a few weeks ago about winter feeding plans, and specifically on hay management and how much we feed. And we talked about figuring about 2% of the body weight of the cows.
That's how much they'll actually consume.
How much they eat. And then estimating their body weight and how much a hay bale weighs. So if you use some of those numbers, and if I said I had 25 cows, they're 1,000 pounds, eating 2%. That's 20 pounds per cow, pretty easy math, 500 pounds of hay per day. Average 1,000-pound bale?
Yeah, okay.
So that means
every other day.
Every other day a bale would last. When you go out and actually watch and see what happens at using those rates, the bales are disappearing faster. What am I missing?
Well, one, your cows don't weigh 1,000 pounds.
Okay.
So there's the first error.
Yeah.
And second of all, probably your bales may not weigh 1,000 pounds either.
Yep.
And they may not be eating 2% of their body weight. Maybe you got actually a little better quality hay than you thought you did, and so they're...
No, I don't think that's it.
Okay.
I've seen that.
You've seen that.
That's not the end.
Well, the lower the quality is probably then the more wastage you're getting. They're pulling it out and they're not eating it, but it still disappears.
Absolutely. So if we say, okay, well, maybe the cows really weigh 1,200 pounds, and they're eating 2.1% of their body weight, and I'm wasting 15%.
Okay.
Now, those cows would be eating 724 pounds a day versus 500. So even if my
2 bales every other day.
Yeah, I need 2 bales every other day. So don't forget to account for the wastage. But one of the things that I wanted to talk about was, as you put together a plan, all plans are good, but when you implement it, you have to watch the outcome, right?
Well,
so if
the evaluation step.
I mean, you purchased a certain amount of hay, or you put up a certain amount of hay, assuming it would get you through the winter. But within a few weeks, you can really get a pretty good idea of whether your original calculation is really going to work or not. So do you need to find more forage sources, or are you going to have plenty? So you'd reassess.
Right?
Well, I noticed, too, I just started our cows at home feeding some protein supplement mid-December. I'd sort of done all the math, and I was kind of knew what my hay feeding schedule was, and I sort of thought the hay is pretty decent hay to start with, but intake went up about another 20%. Yeah. So about that half from 2 to 2.5% intake happened because I was getting better passage rate, and the cows look better and they're happier. But you're going through hay. I'm going through hay faster.
Yeah. I did the same. So when you feed a little bit of protein, and the trick is that you're supplementing, not substituting, right? I don't want to feed so much that all of a sudden I'm substituting.
Because there's energy in that protein supplement as well.
And
you're just really trying to get them to eat more forage.
Yep, absolutely. Next thing I'd like to talk about as we start thinking about breeding season right around the corner, and I want to ask you guys, if I'm sitting here today and I'm thinking about, man, I got to get a heifer bull this year, what are the things that I should consider relative to purchasing that heifer bull? How do I decide what kind of bull to get?
Yeah, that's a great question, and certainly a timely one with, as you mentioned, bull sale seasons around the corner. I think getting a really clear view of, not maybe even just as a broad stroke, what it is that you actually need, right? Sometimes we have a perception of what we think we need, and we actually do a critical analysis based on some data and some other information. Maybe the want and the need are different things. So, taking some time to really think through the breeding system in particular, about what bulls we're going to turn out with which kinds of females, and what really the calving-ease need is.
Well, and I think, first of all, when you talk about bulls that we're going to breed to heifers, calving ease is going to be one of the first things we're going to talk about. I mean, there's certainly other traits that are important as well, but calving ease is going to be the most important consideration. But it shouldn't mean that it drives everything we're thinking about. For instance, I think what you're saying, Dr. Weber, is look at your own herd. If your herd really hasn't had very much calving difficulty, well, then maybe you don't need to pick the very most extreme calving ease type of bulls, because the genetics of your cow herd is such that you're not really in trouble. Or for opposite, somebody that's the last couple of years they've really struggled with too many heifers having difficult births, and then maybe we need to get a little bit more serious about how we're selecting for calving ease. So I think calving ease is the main topic, but part of that is, well, how much calving ease do I need? Maybe I could be very much in the middle of the ballpark, or kind of the average calving ease bull will be fine for my herd, or my neighbor might need a bull that's a little bit more extreme calving ease, more less risk of calving ease. So it becomes topic number one, but that doesn't mean I have to go to extremes.
Yeah. And you're talking about keeping the records, because a lot of times we have EPDs on the bulls coming in. We've got commercial cows or heifers, but if I know characteristics of the bull I used in the past, that helps guide me in this decision, but either calving ease or performance characteristics, because I know how they match up with my cows. Yeah. And it may be different for my herd than it is for your herd.
And there's a lot of things that can be different between our herds. One is even just the season when the calves calve. So we know that cows that calve a little bit later so late spring, early summer, those tend to be lighter calves than calves that are born in the winter. Yep. And so, if one of the producers is going to calve in January, February, they actually may need a little more calving ease than another producer that's calving in April, May. And that has to do with, so the same genetics, but
just
because
seasonal
of the
effects,
seasonal effects, you can get by with a little less calving ease if I'm calving a little bit later in the year.
Yeah. You point to a really, I think one of the challenges I observe the most facing producers currently is we get in a cycle where we think we need, very extreme levels of calving ease, which in a number of breeds now results in calves that are in the 40 to 50 pound range.
And you actually start to run into kind of
calf survival issues, right? So there's a diminishing return, and if we're using bulls that are 12 to maybe 18, 19, 20 calving ease number and say the Angus breed, and we're still having dystocia issues, there's other problems in the herd, because we know, if you go and look at, Angus bulls that are in the 7, 8, 9 kind of range, which is pretty close to breed average, the expected dystocia rate in heifers is in the low single digits. So, a 20 calving ease EPD doesn't necessarily get you 5 fewer calves at that level. It just makes them shorter gestation and a lot lighter, and creates potentially other problems. We can think about, a really bad storm and late birth weights. The hypothermia issue way outstrips the 2 assists that we might have had if we used a bull that was a 7.
Because the goal is really to have live calves on the ground, not even just born, but to survive that first few weeks.
Yep.
And so you need some viability, which I think one of the things that maybe what all of us have seen is taking calving ease to too far an extreme. Now, I remember working with herds where we ended up doing a lot of C-sections, a lot of difficult pulls, and that's also the other, what we're trying to avoid is those big calving difficult situations. But one of the things is, first of all, breed, because there are certain breeds that are very low in their risk for dystocia. So the Longhorn breed and some others. But you have to think about some other things, because the problem with that matings, and I had clients that wanted to breed heifers to a Longhorn bull, but just because they wanted no calving problems. And they got close to no calving problems. But then what you end up with is not a very marketable product at the end.
Yeah. So blending those, and I think the other piece is, there's been enough advancement with genomics and selection that we can have really acceptable levels of calving ease with really outstanding levels of performance. And so don't immediately discount when I go to buy a calving ease bull, making some expectations relative to the performance of the calves that come out of those matings, because we can have both pieces today. And I think that sort of speaks to particularly if you're a small breeder and you're going to use one bull to breed heifers and mature cows, don't make that breeding decision all about calving ease EPD, because you'll be disappointed in the trade-off and the performance you gave up in the calves that come out of that.
Well, that actually makes me think of another topic, which was, so should I keep replacements out of these heifers that are bred to a calving ease bull? Is that a good thing or a bad thing from the future productivity of those heifers?
The classic yes and it depends answer, right?
Yeah.
So you can keep replacement heifers out of those, but if you're going to do that, make sure that you also include maternal calving ease as part of your selection criteria. So we talked about earlier the differences between, if I have calving issues and I'm using bulls that have high calving ease EPD, more calving ease probably isn't the solution. It's some other factors, and one of those may be maternal calving ease. And so we know as calving ease EPD goes up, there's a negative genetic association with actually how those heifers will calve because of smaller body size and pelvic area. And
what you're saying is the extremely good calving ease, extremely low calving risk bulls tend to have daughters that have calving problems.
Because
they're smaller skeletons.
Exactly.
And again, kind of a warning about going to the extremes.
Yep. So the balance in that, it can really, really help.
From the Beef Cattle Institute at K-State, Bob Weaber, Bob Larson, and Brad White, this Cattle Chat podcast in full can be found at beefcattleinsitute.org. You're tuned to Agriculture Today.
When you are in need of timely, reliable, and trusted information, K-State Research and Extension is here. Whether it's organizing people, information, or resources, they have the necessary tools. Community comes first for K-State Research and Extension. For more information and to connect with your county's extension agents, visit www.ksre.k-state.edu.
You're tuned in to Agriculture Today over the K-State Radio Network, now in our 96th year of broadcast service to agriculture in Kansas and the Central Plains. Eric Atkinson here. Now on to today's agricultural news headlines, courtesy in part of DTN. That Chinese delegation, led by Vice Premier Liu He, arrived in the U.S. yesterday in preparation for signing the Phase 1 trade deal with the United States. There have been more than 200 invited to that signing ceremony, which is scheduled for tomorrow. Despite some conjecture to the contrary, Treasury Secretary Steve Mnuchin said the agreement was not changed as it was translated and still calls for China to buy $40 to $50 billion in U.S. agricultural goods annually and a total of $200 billion in U.S. goods total over 2 years. The U.S. and China will undertake semi-annual talks to push for economic reform and resolve disputes separate from the trade talks, that according to a statement by Mnuchin, as well as U.S. Trade Representative Robert Lighthizer. As for enforcement of the deal, then, Mnuchin also said that if China does not comply with the terms of the deal, quoting Mnuchin here, the president retains the authority to put on tariffs, both existing tariffs and additional tariffs, he said. A special office will be set up in each country to monitor implementation. If conflicts are not resolved within 90 days, the U.S. could take unspecified proportionate action against China and vice versa. Groups that have campaigned for strong rules to protect farmers and ranchers from anti-competitive business practices in meatpacking and processing say the rule proposed by the Trump administration to make changes to the Packers and Stockyards Act is at best only a small step. The USDA's Agricultural Marketing Service said the proposed regulation specifies 4 criteria that the Secretary of Agriculture would consider when determining whether an undue or unreasonable preference or advantage had occurred in violation of the Packers and Stockyards Act. This proposal has a 60-day comment period that will end on March the 13th. This rule was driven by a directive in the 2008 Farm Bill. Under the proposed rule, the Secretary of Agriculture could consider whether a preference or advantage given to a seller can or cannot be justified based on cost savings, or whether the preference can or cannot be justified as a reasonable business decision. Some preferences or advantages could be considered undue or unreasonable if they are so unfair that they tend to restrain trade and create excessively unfair conditions for a certain group of people. The Secretary would also consider whether a preference or advantage can or cannot be considered a reasonable business practice in the industry, and the Secretary could consider other factors beyond the 4 criteria on a case-by-case basis. The country of Brazil is forecast to overtake the U.S. as the world's top soybean producer, according to the latest USDA numbers. Here's more from the USDA's Stephanie Ho.
USDA is expecting a record soybean crop from Brazil this crop year.
Soybean planting is just finished up in the southern part of the country. Harvest is about to begin in the main growing areas of Mato Grosso.
Acting World Ag Outlook Board Chair Mark Jekanowski has the figures from the latest crop report.
Brazil's production is forecast at 123 million tons. That would be record production, and that's up about 5% from last year, and it would exceed U.S. production by a fair amount.
He notes that U.S. soybean production is down this year because of unfavorable weather conditions, while Brazil's production could be higher than expected because of good weather conditions.
It's far too early to say that Brazil overtaking the U.S. in production this year is a condition that's going to persist for future years. They'll trade off back and forth for sure.
This is Stephanie Ho for the U.S. Department of Agriculture in Washington, D.C.
Time now for our weekly segment for you dairy producers, Milk Lines. Awaiting with that, K-State dairy specialist Mike Brook. Mike?
Today I'd like to visit with our Kansas dairy farmers and actually the Kansas dairy industry about our annual dairy days. They will be held again January 22nd, which is a Wednesday, at the Whiteside Amish Community Building near Hutchinson, and on Thursday, January 23rd, at the Seneca Community Center in Seneca, Kansas. This is an opportunity for the dairy industry and dairy producers to come together and hear some very interesting information being presented about how they operate their dairy farms and some new inventions that are coming along the way. Programs are identical at both sites. Registration will start at 10 o'clock in the morning, and the program will conclude about 3 o'clock in the afternoon. Some of the things that you'll be able to learn if you come to these meetings would be things like what some of our dairy producers have learned about using milking robots. Yes, the robots that milk cows. We now have 5 farms throughout the state that utilize this technology, and we'll be hearing from 4 of those farmers about their experiences and how they're using these milking robots on their dairies. We'll also have Dr. Kevin Duvetter, who is retired from K-State, come back and talk to us about dairy replacement heifer economics. We'll also hear from another retired K-State professor, Dr. Larry Cora. He's going to talk to us about some of the changes that we're seeing in the beef industry relative to what we're seeing going on in crossbreeding in the dairy industry. We'll also have Stan Irwin from Dairy Management Inc. He will be talking to us about how activist and undercover videos are affecting our industry, and more importantly, how you can protect your farm should this happen in your location. We'll also hear some information from Dr. Jeff Stevenson, a reproductive physiologist here at K-State. He'll be talking about how disease affects the estrus cycle, ovulation, and pregnancy outcomes on the first timed AI. One of our graduate students, Billy Brown, will be talking about the effects of pre-gutting round hay bales during baling on forage quality and processing time after baling. And we'll also hear from Dr. Mike Day, our new department head in animal science. He'll be giving us an industry update from the perspective of the animal sciences department. We'll also get updates from the Kansas Dairy Association and Kansas Dairy Commission, as well as Midwest Dairy Association during the course of the day. Again, the dates for the meetings will be Wednesday, January 22nd, and that will be at the Whiteside Community Building in Whiteside, Kansas. If you wish to attend that meeting, please contact the Reno County Extension Office. If you're interested in attending the meeting held Thursday, January 23rd at the Seneca Community Center, please register by calling the Meadowlark Extension District Office to do that. Again, this is Mike Brook with K-State Research and Extension, encouraging our dairy farmers to put on their calendars Wednesday, January 22nd and Thursday, January 23rd, the annual Dairy Days from K-State Research and Extension.
Thanks, Mike. And you're tuned to Agriculture Today.
With the shortage of primary care physicians, especially in rural areas, health education and disease prevention are vital. K-State Research and Extension programs address quality of life, personal development, and health behaviors across all life stages of all social-economic groups. To learn more about health education, one of K-State Research and Extension's 5 grand challenges, visit www.ksre.ksu.edu.
This Agriculture Today comes to a close on wildlife management. Aboard once again is wildlife specialist Charlie Lee of K-State Research and Extension. Charlie, you're going to pass along to us today a new economical analysis, and this is rather unique. It looked at, you say, the costs and benefits of coyote control and removal, and we're all familiar of the issues that coyotes cause to our livestock industry and otherwise.
Well, this is some information from a very recent journal that was the Human-Wildlife Interactions Journal that was published this winter, and it discusses the costs of various coyote management options that are out there, both lethal and non-lethal, and couples that with coyote biology in a computer modeling effort to try to determine which of those options would be the best to apply. Keep in mind that coyote populations seem to be increasing. I think when we look at the Department of Wildlife and Parks data in the last 30 years, those coyote populations in Kansas may have increased as much as threefold or perhaps even higher. When we have more coyotes, we're going to have more conflicts. The number of those conflicts is always debatable, but National Agricultural Statistics Service, their most recent estimate, which was in 2011, on the cow-calf loss from all predators, showed a dollar loss of about $98 million, with coyotes causing 53% of that loss and other predators, including dogs, for lesser amounts. When you break that down into the number of cattle that are lost in Kansas due to coyotes, the same NASS report showed 800 cattle, which they determined were animals greater than 500 pounds, were lost to predators in Kansas per year, and about 3,900 calves. They valued that at about $2.2 million. So you can see from those numbers that predation is a significant factor in raising livestock profitably, and that oftentimes management needs to be applied. But we've taught for many years that not all coyotes are predators, and they have a very wide diet. I think most people would be surprised to find out that for parts of the year, coyotes are consuming primarily fruit and insects, but they also consume mammals at various times of the year, and including preying on livestock. The percentage of those animals, domestic livestock, that are lost to coyotes really varies, but I think oftentimes coyotes are blamed for other causes of livestock loss. Keep in mind there's predation, the direct killing, and there's scavenging. Sometimes animals are lost to other causes, whether those would be disease or like respiratory problems, which is certainly a very big mortality factor in the cattle industry. You got digestive problems, you got calving problems, you got weather-related issues. All of those can lead to livestock mortalities, and coyotes are going to prey on many of those animals that are left in the landscape.
So with all of these variables possible, was all of that worked into this study? It's a computer analysis, you say, of the costs and returns to controlling coyotes.
Yes, they looked at the list of options for lethal would have been aerial shooting with helicopter or fixed-wing aircraft. They looked at the use of foothold traps, snares, calling and shooting, denning, or the finding young coyote pups in dens, livestock protection collars, and then the M44 devices, or sodium cyanide devices, that are used in some states. They also evaluated non-lethal control, including calving synchronization, fencing, the frightening devices, better removal and disposal of carcasses, livestock guardian animals and herders, and then sterilization of coyote populations. Those were all of the techniques that they looked at. And then they tried many simulations, and they come up with the comparison values of the reduction in the net cost to run without coyote management or with using one of those control methods to manage coyote numbers.
And so what would be the most cost-effective means of control out of that list?
Well, in this particular study, they showed the most cost-effective method of coyote control to reduce calf depredation was the combined use of snares and livestock guardian animals. When that control technique was applied 1 month prior to the primary calving month, that snare and livestock guardian animal combination showed an 81% decrease in the overall costs of calf loss and predator management during the 10-year period that the computers simulated. Cost effectiveness of the methods deteriorated as the number of applications per year increased, and I think it shows that there are some results, but there are also some intangible values of coyotes through grazing benefits. You got fewer prey species such as rabbits that are on the landscape that would then compete with livestock for forage, so there's also the recreational value of coyotes. Those items were left out of this particular study, and I think those are some things that perhaps ranchers should consider before they're implementing lethal coyote management.
It's something you do point out because of, if nothing else, coyote mobility. Control measures can ebb and flow in their success.
Certainly we have coyotes that are not livestock killers. We have coyotes that are transient animals that never develop a home range, that are probably not as efficient at killing as those coyotes that develop and defend a home range. So I think the information is fairly clear that there's no single solution to coyote and calf depredation events, and we need to consider cost benefits to determine what works best in your particular situation, what's legal in the state of Kansas, and what's the most cost efficient and suitable. And once you find that combination of control methods, make sure that it's applied in a manner that's going to achieve the best results.
Good advice there. And once more, he's been drawing today from a new study on the costs and returns of coyote control. Charlie, we appreciate the information right here. Charlie Lee, wildlife specialist, K-State Research and Extension. Well, once again, our time's away. Thanks for tuning in. Eric Atkinson bidding you a good day for Agriculture Today. This is the K-State Radio Network.